Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Welcome to episode 50. Woo woo. I'm so excited to have shared 50 whole episodes with you. And I want to mark this occasion with talking about something that actually causes so much deep frustration and unhappiness and disappointment in our marriages and how we can get out of it. Because what I want most for you is to have the kind of marriage you've always wanted. And ultimately, I want you to have the mindset and the skill set to get exactly that. As I've been talking about, so many women right now are aching for more love and connection and a sense of being deeply seen and understood and that's a sense of that supportive team in life with their husband. But what they see is very often their husbands don't seem to be able to rise up and meet them in that place of that deep connection, right? And so today I want to dive into more about why and what you can do about it if you've had this experience in your marriage. So you're no longer wasting your energy fighting the reality of how your man is. And so you can actually have the power to make your experience of your marriage an amazing one and really bring about what I called a few weeks ago a sensitivity or a sensitive love revolution. I'm always saying that in different ways. So you can bring that into a revolution of sensitivity and love into your own marriage. I want to help you today feel more understanding and compassion and love for all involved in your marriage, because those feelings are the powerful fuel that will make doing this sometimes challenging work of making your marriage the one you want, right? Making that a reality, which also, importantly, as we've been talking about lately, can require not just kindness and softness and sweetness, right? And like warm, fuzzy lovies, but also a fierce kind of love that means business, that sets boundaries, that won't allow mistreatment, that allows you to be your own most powerful self-advocate for the marriage you want and the treatment you want and deserve. So let's dive in. And I got a lot to say today, so buckle those seatbelts. So generally speaking, what I've noticed, what we women want and expect out of a partnership with our husband is so much more than it was even maybe just 2 generations ago. Like so different from what my grandma wanted out of marriage, I want out of marriage, right? Back then, I think, I wasn't back then, so I can't say for sure, but I think there was a more of a generalized acceptance that marriage was somewhat of a practical arrangement. Of course, there were good feelings involved, ideally, right? But we also had predetermined, unquestioned roles back then. Yeah. And certainly even before the 50s, even more so, right? But marriage is no longer in our modern times simply about companionship and physical stability, right? To most modern women, it's about sustained intimacy, right? Like of the physical, emotional, and intellectual sort. Yeah. Modern women want more closeness. We want more deep talks. We want more romance. We want our husband to care about what we think, to support and encourage our development, to inspire us, to show us interest like interest in us and empathy and appreciation for how we feel. Hear that one a lot, right? We want him to share his own feelings with us openly and frequently, right? We want him to be more sensitive to us. We want our husband to be someone we experience passion with, and also comfort, understanding, security, and really like this deep sense of being seen and known and loved for who we are, right? I think of this in short as we want more. We want a more mature, evolved, grown-up man than we usually have. Someone who meets us on all levels, what we might think of as a real partner to share our life with. Yeah? Does this sound familiar? And does it feel like maybe your husband's not measuring up? Yeah, that's very common these days. And I actually think, of course, it's a wonderful thing to want these things. It's even a virtuous thing, right? That you can imagine that for yourself, and you can imagine your man being this most mature, like full-hearted, expressive version of himself, right? And that you want your relationship to become like the fullest expression of human connection possible. That's beautiful. I love that desire for us as women. The problem comes in, though, when we look around us at the reality of how things are. Right? In so many cases, this is not who our men are being. This is not how they're showing up. Now, almost everybody listening here has a good man in their life. Yeah? But he might not be evolved, right? Or mature, or any of these, like this sort of ideal that we want him to be. Yeah? And this is because the reality is many men are still stuck somewhat in that like kind of old school masculinity style, or at least they still have like echoes of that in them. Certainly not everybody, not all. Right? I know some men out there have done a lot of personal growth in this area, or were just really lucky to be raised in a way that made this easier for them. And of course, I am generalizing at the risk of oversimplifying. So this isn't going to apply to every single man in the world by any means, but it might ring true for a lot of them, in a lot of our marriages. So the bad news is, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, just because we want something and we envision it, we have this beautiful vision for ourselves, doesn't mean we can just expect, reality to match up with that, right? That our husband suddenly becomes or shows up as this evolved man we want him to be. That's just not how life works, unfortunately. And the thing is, many of us do unconsciously expect our man to be this way, or expect him to change into the ways we want him to be, just because we want him to, right? Or just because we believe he should be that way, or we want to be loved and treated in a way, in this certain way, right? That we believe that he should be able to do that, right? So when we come at our husband and what we want from him from this perspective, like he should be able to be this way, and he's not, what happens is this sets us up for like a really painful, almost like tug-of-war kind of thing that happens in marriages, and I see all the time in my coaching practice. It's kind of like many of us women are fighting and crying and clawing for what we want from our man, right? Trying to get him to give us what we want, right? Insisting on more, fighting for it. And ultimately ending up feeling helpless to have what we want in our marriage. Does this resonate? I do not want you to be powerless and helpless to have what you want in your marriage. So how do we stop this? How do we stop the powerlessness and make the changes we want? So I'm going to give you 2 specific things about how to do that in a bit. But first, I want to start with actually looking at where we give away that power in our relationships and why that's really been the norm historically. So one of the biggest societal messages, right? This is where it is. The societal messages that we've taken in that feel like our reality, right? One of them, and I would call this, it's like a subtle patriarchal way of thinking, is that most of us, right, unless you were raised by wolves and just got out of the woods a moment ago, most of us have absorbed this idea, this way of thinking very unconsciously. Okay, so you might yourself at first glance, when I mention all of this, you might not believe it's really there. But I almost guarantee you it is to some greater or lesser degree. So give it a moment and sort of be open to seeing how this might actually be in there inside of you. So this is the thinking, really the sort of toxic thinking that's passed down to us from patriarchal mindsets in our world. Specifically, it's that men are the authority to look to. The ones that are more capable, the ones who have more power. The man is the one who knows what he's doing, who's in charge, who has more know-how, more savvy, right? In general. We still, as women, have this faint or not so faint trace of this way of thinking, of believing that men are like sort of the higher being, right? That they are the ones who are supposed to be leaders in the world and know just how to run life right, correctly, right? And even if you now have feminist ideas, right? Or ideas that contradict that you've chosen to adopt or you've learned along your journey, right? Even if you were raised by feminist parents, free-thinking parents, you still will have absorbed this to some degree because it's like the air we all breathe. Less than it used to be, for sure, but it's still there. And it just kind of gets sucked into us without our permission. It exists there on some level, kind of like, I don't know if you've been learning about forever chemicals, right? Forever chemicals, they don't go away, right? Until this idea, like a forever chemical, we can actually learn how to dissolve it, unlike a forever chemical. We can learn how to dissolve it from our system. This old way of thinking about men can be eliminated. But first we have to see that it's there, right? This idea that he's the authority, the savvy one, right? And this idea has snuck its way into so many modern marriages, right? In subtle and explicit ways that lead to a whole lot of pain for both partners, right? And this is sometimes what it looks like. At some level, we as women expect our partner, our man, to be better at loving relationships than he is, or even maybe than we are. We expect him to steer the emotional ship of our marriage. We rely on him to know how to please us, right? To show up and love us just how we want to be loved, right? To sort of be the all-knowing, all-capable person in the relationship. Just check to see if a little bit of it's there. This was definitely there for me early on. And I think sometimes it even still sneaks in here and there, right? We also expect our man to know how to be like the leader in the relationship, the empathic, emotionally deep, conversationalist type leader, great communicator type leader, right? To know how to be patient and kind, even in the midst of having an argument when they're upset and triggered. You know that one? Oh man, I hear that one all the time. Like, he shouldn't get defensive, right? Like, he should know better, right? He should not get, he should be able to be calm while he's upset, right? And we expect him to always be able to support us and know just what to say when we're sad, for example. Yeah? Really, we think that our man should have the power to create happiness our happiness and a sense of deep value in us, right? And really that we should be able to almost, to some degree, hand over the job of tending to our own happiness and well-being and sense of self-worth to him. I know in my first marriage, I really deeply and totally unconsciously expected my husband to somehow be able to magically know the right words to say when I was upset, the right things to do to take away any upset I was having, right? To be able to quickly bring us back to loving and harmonious territory, right? If we had a little argument. Right? I expected that of him. He was a man, after all. It really was this idea that somehow he knows best, or he should know best, and that he had great power, or should have great power, to do all these things, being the guy and all. Yeah? So just notice if any of that resonated. It's in there for so many of us. This is actually, and I want you to hear this, a fiction that so many of us have bought into. It's not a fact. It's not true. He shouldn't be able to do all these things. But we believe it so often, at least at some unconscious level. And when we're believing this, and at the same time, we're watching our man not live up to these ideas and expectations, and we're watching him fall short of these ideas we have about how he should be over and over, we're giving him so much authority, so much power to disappoint. We're abdicating our own authority and power in this way. We're making ourselves powerless, and we're giving him the power. And this oftentimes, what this looks like actually is blaming him for our unhappiness and marriage problems. So you will know, or signs that you might be doing this are if you feel disappointed in your partner regularly, if you feel frustrated or deeply frustrated with him and how he shows up in your marriage, or you feel resentful, right? And you might find yourself getting really easily triggered or mad at him, and you might say stinging things to him. You might even feel kind of entitled to be rude to him. You might tell him how to do things and get mad when he doesn't. Right? You might feel ripped off and let down. Yeah? Now, blame is really one of the easiest paths for our default primal brain to take. It loves going down the blame path. It's very human and very normal. But it's also the least effective and most disempowering route you can take. By blaming your husband for how hard things are, for not being great and mature and skillful in the ways of deep loving intimacy, for being flawed and unable to be the leader and the loving emotional authority in your marriage, when really all he's doing is just being a regular modern man acting as he was conditioned to, you are deeply undermining your capacity for deep love and happiness with him. Because here he is, he's just a man growing up in this world, being taught what he's taught, being conditioned how he's conditioned, which we're going to talk about in a minute, right? But when we expect our man to be the exception to this like modern male reality, like the way most men show up, right? When we expect him to somehow have magically escaped his cultural inheritance, if you do that and you keep giving him the emotional leadership role in your marriage, you will be very disappointed at him. You will feel robbed of the love and connection you could be feeling with him, right? You will actually be, not just feel it, you will be robbed of the love and connection that's possible between you. And you will feel helpless to make your marriage one that you love, or to have a marriage that you love with him. So we can blame him for not living up to our expectations and the ideas about how a husband should be, right? Which obviously, as I just said, leads to pain and powerlessness. Or, as women, we can be much more effective in making our marriages what we want them to be by these two things. One, understanding and accepting the reality and even feeling compassion for the reality of how men are right now, what they're dealing with, why they're the way they are. Yeah. And then the second thing is stepping into a place of power again and claiming this powerful opportunity we have in this current reality as women to bring more love into our marriages, to cultivate the kind of marriage and even world we want. So let's start by seeing if we can move the needle on reducing the blame and accessing more useful emotions like acceptance, understanding, and compassion. So this really starts just by understanding the current reality of where men are right now, right? Most men really aren't so skilled in the ways of love, at least not the kind of love we envision for ourselves, right? Your man didn't come naturally with the powers to love you just right and make your marriage the one you always wanted or always thought you'd have, right? He isn't naturally better at relating and loving than you. Many men, if not most, don't know how to be so sensitive to our feelings. They don't know how to talk about feelings. They don't even know how to understand their own feelings, let alone your feelings. They don't feel comfortable or able to support us emotionally in the way we'd like them to. Right? They express their love in a way that isn't in line with how we best receive love. And though they might want to break out of all of that and be good at all of that, they might even want that themselves on some level. Doing so is not really supported for men in our world. Not fully and not yet. And this is because we live in a culture that really does not even care to turn our little boys into strong, loving, kind men who know how to thrive in relationships. We live in a culture that tends to do the opposite to our little boys' souls. So you in this culture might be hurting, right? But our men are hurting too. They are in pain. They are confused. They aren't able to deal with their feelings very well. They are feeling deep shame, right? That's almost like hanging off of them like a droopy sweater, living inside of them in their muscles. They are like us in so many levels, traumatized by this insensitive culture. Right? A culture that never gave them the skills and the tools and the edge to be who they really want to be, to even know who they want to be. Yeah? Nobody showed them the way before. That's a hard truth. So I want you to hear this. It was never his ineptitude that caused your pain. It was never his personal fault. Right? We are all in this together. We are all finding our way with less than ideal conditions. Just take that in for a moment. And notice if you might feel just a little bit more compassion for your partner right now, or at least a little bit more acceptance right now. Acceptance often feels like peace, a little more peace, a little less anger, a little less resentment, a little less disappointment. Yeah, and maybe you really can taste the compassion. I know I can. Acceptance and compassion, these are gifts to yourself. When you feel these things, they will free your heart up. They'll free you up to feel light and full enough internally, energetically, to actually do something effective about all of this, about this current state of male reality. Yeah? compassion is a way better fuel for making changes in our marriage and in our world than blame. Blame will close the door to change, and compassion will open it, as will acceptance. So I want you to hear this. So much of our pain as women in our marriages is caused by buying into this terrible patriarchal fiction and all the helplessness that it brings when we believe this idea that he, the man, is the one to bring more of the loving good stuff into your marriage when he obviously can't, right? And believing that you aren't the one with the keys to love in your own hands. When we're believing he is, we overlook the keys we have in our own hands, right? We don't believe we're the ones with the keys. But that is a thought error. That is wrong. Have you ever noticed how women are the ones who really know relationships, who tend to be more oriented towards relationships, right? More natural at loving and connection? That is the reality. That is the true story. And right now you have a powerful opportunity in understanding this fact. So this is the second thing here I want to dive into. I want you to grasp today. This culture has taught us as women to be very relationship oriented and has supported us to develop at least some of the skills that lead to great marriages. And you as a woman are also more naturally from birth endowed with the gifts of creating connection. This is one of the innately female powers. We are born naturally gravitating deeply to connection, way more than males. Our brains are literally more geared toward it, more wired for it. There are studies that show that the typical female newborn babe, right, who's only 24 hours old, that these little females, these little us, the you and me's, when we were only 24 hours old, responded to distress cries of another baby and responded to the human face significantly more than male babies did or do. This is a fact. This is science. So you are sitting on a very big source of power, your female self. And if you're a sensitive, highly sensitive person, it's even bigger, right? Sensitive female power is huge. We are the power. Our strengths and our natural energy and intelligence, it's really the antidote to so many problems in marriage and in general on this planet. Right? We are naturally fiercely committed to love and the family and caring for one another. Right? We are empathic and have a natural drive to want to respect and understand and unify. It is in our hormones, in our brain, and our nervous system. It is biologically driven from within to excel in these realms. And testosterone-formed male brains do not look for or create social connection in the way women's brains do. They're different. They're wired a little differently. They have a little different hormonal cocktail in there. Yeah. There are studies also that show girls as young ones actually take turns 20 times more often than boys. And when girls pretend, I don't know if you can remember when you used to pretend, it's mostly about nurturing and caregiving. Whereas with boys, totally not, right? I think of my boys. There's an occasional bit of that, but mostly it was like swords and and roughhousing and competition. Yeah. That's how they're naturally wired. Like, I did an experiment where I gave my little guy a doll, my first boy, when he was real little. Nah, not interested. Went right for the trucks. Vroom, vroom. I tried. The female powers that we have, that you and I have, are connection, compassion, nurturance, collaboration, relationship ingenuity, right? Joint decision making and problem solving. And we do that with minimal conflict, naturally. I love thinking of this as power, not as power over, right? As in the sort of male patriarchal approach, power over, right? Like a dominant and a subservient, right? But power with, power together, power in finding our way through as a team, right? And the magic of that to me is profound and far-reaching. And all of this is very much what sensitive people's power is. I oftentimes think of sensitive people as kind of got this more feminine energy going a little bit. There's some feminine qualities to that. So if you want to hear more about sensitive people's power and female powers, totally go back and listen to episode 46, The Sensitive Love Revolution. It's pretty related to today. And I want to, instead of just spouting all the things that I think are feminine gifts or female gifts and strengths in relationships, I want to ask you what you see as your female relationship gifts or strengths. I would take a little inventory on that, because when you see it, you're going to feel not powerless, but powerful. And one thing I'd like for you to consider putting on that list is that there is a pure, fierce power in the soft, nurturing love and safety and connection that we women naturally infuse into our relationships. Yeah, that softness and nurturing and connection that we bring in is a power, right? As you may have heard me say before, love lives in softness and safety. And especially when we get the hardness and anger of our own blame out of the way, we bring the softness and safety powerfully into our marriages. We are leaders. You are a leader of love, of the best kind of love there is. You are the one with the keys, my dear, beautiful, sensitive woman. And even if you haven't fully learned to use those keys yet, you can learn to use them. If we women want to see our partners meet us more where we are at emotionally, to show up with more interest in how we feel, if we want him to share his own feelings with us openly and often, if we want more sensitivity from him and a lasting sense of emotional and intellectual and physical intimacy, if we want more of a sense of being an allied team in life with him, if we want that, we need to take responsibility for creating it by learning to use the keys we were naturally born with and can develop and finesse more fully. Yeah. So let's be clear on this. Like, we lead love by first leading our own selves to it in so many of the ways I've been talking about on this podcast and all these 50 episodes, some version of how to be more of a leader, right? Specifics and less specifics, right? We do this by doing the work in and on ourselves, by healing ourselves, by developing the mindset, by developing emotional agency, by developing safety internally, by being the example, right? Which means creating in ourselves all of these things, creating a loving environment and safe environment in ourselves, right? Which will go out by extension and show up in our marriage. It will be the environment in which our husband can finally evolve if and when he's ready. So a great episode to check out on safety is episode 33, where a culture of love and safety in your marriage begins. Totally go check that one out. But I want to offer you an example of how this works, a real life example of a client of mine. So in our first few sessions together, she and I worked on her dropping this idea that he's the one who's got to, fill in the blank, right? Show up this way or that way. Be more empathetic. Be more blah, 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 right? We worked on dropping that. And as she did that, she was able to turn her focus back to showing up for herself. And as she did that, and with my help, she was able to build deeper safety inside herself and much deeper confidence in herself as a woman and all her gifts. And she built this capacity to lovingly tend to her own feelings so much more herself, right? Not needing him to do that so much. Yeah. And this freed her up to approach and interact with her partner with love and compassion and support, and really to be a safe space for him to be him as he is, the human that he is. And this was pretty amazing to watch, and it always is. Right? She felt blown away by how he wasn't just like way more magnetized to her, but he also felt safe to really open up and be vulnerable with her about his feelings in a way he never had been able to before. And as a bonus, he started talking about how he wanted to take her on all these vacations, and he was excited to do that. So, sinking into these two things I've talked about today, replacing blame with understanding, acceptance, and compassion, and seeing yourself as a powerful leader of love, these are some of the most important tickets to feeling the freedom and lightness and empowerment, really what I call the emotional fuel, to bring out your natural brilliance of connection and loving. And at the same time, it's the fuel that will allow you to be able to set strong boundaries, right? Which we're going to actually get into next week, and not tolerate disrespect and mistreatment from your partner, and ultimately teach him to treat you well, right? As we've been talking about in recent episodes a bunch, right? Allow you to say no when you mean no. Allow you to not be controlled, all of these things, right? So in other words, these two things, releasing blame and seeing yourself as a powerful leader of love, these will give you the capacity to have a real, mature, genuinely respectful and loving, modern human marriage, right? One in which you can actually teach your man by example and naturally cultivate the environment in which he can himself become the fully mature version of himself. A man who responds and considers and feels and loves more consciously, more empathically, more vulnerably, more deeply. So I want you to be clear here, because this can get confusing for some of us. It is not your job as a woman. It is not our job as women to help the men grow up and evolve. We do not have to do that. We don't have to, okay? But if we want to have the kind of mature, healthy, respectful, loving, lasting relationships that we envision with our partner, at the bare minimum, we have to understand and accept that this is how it is for men. All these things that I told you about where men are at right now in our modern world, right? And not understand this just for your man, right? But really all men, right? It's not just your man. It's most men, okay? And we have to, at bare minimum, decide that we are the ones with the gifts. That we as women have actually been truly given the powerful gift of bringing into our lives the love we envision and want. Right? And from there, you can decide if you want to start leading the way and showing the men how it's done. Yeah. And you certainly don't have to accept this invitation, but it is an incredible invitation to accept. Because when you do, you make your marriage into one you feel so much better in. That's the most important thing here. It's a gift to you. And you give your man the best chance at evolving into the best, most mature, loving version of him possible. Yeah. And on top of that, you start to dismantle the patriarchy, like one brick and another brick of the patriarchy that's holding all of us back, right? That's leading to families that are torn apart and traumatized. By accepting this invitation, we as women create more love in this world that so needs it. And we create that first in our own hearts, and then out in our marriages and families, and finally out into the world. All right, my friend, let this marinate for a while, and we'll talk boundaries next time. Be oh so well until then. Before you go, my work as a marriage coach is in large part teaching you to harness the gifts you are naturally given and get way more skillful at using them so you can lead your relationship into this loving place we've been talking about. If you want a really tangible, practical place to start learning such things, I invite you to grab my 7 most powerful phrases to deepen connection booklet. And then follow the sequence, the email sequence that comes along with that, because it goes into more depth about the phrases and how to use them to foster the aspects that we so value as women in our marriages, such as respect, supportiveness, empathy, understanding, vulnerability, love, connection. You can grab your copy if you haven't already at my website, which is lifeisworthloving.com. You'll find various places you can just grab that 7 most powerful phrases to deepen connection. It will be very obvious on the website. And I will also put a direct link to it in the show notes. So go grab it and enjoy.